One more guest, one more segment left for this Wednesday edition of the show. That is with the great Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, and the #1 on Twitter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hi, Adam. Doing all right, man. How about you?
I'm doing well. Appreciate your time here on today's show, sir. I know that I told you that we're going to talk about I think I gave you 4 bowl games I wanted to discuss, but I just real quickly want to get your thoughts on tonight's bowl game with that unique coaching situation for SMU with Sonny Dykes as the head coach, even though he was just named the guy 2 weeks ago, grad assistant calling the plays, number moving down. Is this a game that you've gotten involved in?
I haven't yet. I mean, I would lean a little bit to Louisiana Tech on the side, and even perhaps a lean to the under, because I think how much of the offense is Sonny Dykes going to have been able to put in. I mean, he likes to do that kind of air raid offense that he's done in all of his previous stops. So you wonder, I mean, with kids having to learn maybe some new concepts in a short time, how that's going to work. And, you also wonder the mindset of SMU. They get their coach, and Chad Morris moves on to Arkansas. How the kids are really going to react. So this is a little bit of a tough call for me, but I would think if I had to play it at this point, I mean, obviously sometimes things change a little bit during the day, but this would be one where I probably would lean a little bit to Louisiana Tech and maybe a stronger lean on the under.
Something I want to ask you about here in general, I know you play a lot of high volume, you do a lot of derivative stuff, so a lot of what you do is actually day of the game. And, we've seen in football this year, we see that initial line move based on people grabbing the numbers early on, but then a lot of times we get the significant move on game day. So are you content with, kind of waiting out these bowl games?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes you want to grab some numbers, but keep in mind, with some of these number grabs, it's just kind of getting out ahead of the number, and then maybe a more true position as more stuff comes out. Because it's always a risk to bet really early in bowl games, because then you get suspensions and you get some late coaching changes. Things will happen. And even with some of the high-profile games, with players even sitting out a bowl game, because of they don't want to hurt their draft stock or don't want to get hurt. So it's kind of a pick your poison. Some of these games you want to get in early, and some of these games I think you want to wait. It depends, I think, on the individual situation, and then sometimes you'll get a big move that you might want to play against. We kind of saw last night where the over got bet in the, and I didn't personally bet it, but the over got bet in the Boca Raton Bowl with Akron and FAU. But, and it never really approached the total. It was, I think it opened 61 and closed 65. And it ended up being 50-3. Now, usually when a team gets 50 points, you're going to get the over, but it didn't happen that way. So, you do want to be careful. And I think when a number moves that much, I don't have a specific stat on it, but more often than not, if you come back the other way on a big move like that, you're probably going to win more than you lose.
All right, let's go to Thursday night here, and let's talk the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl, and that's the best bowl name that we have out there, but not exactly the best bowl matchup. Temple and FIU in this one. Temple a touchdown favorite.
Yeah, Love was looking at this game, and FIU I think was kind of a unheralded story in Miami, in the fact that a solid 8-4 record. Obviously, FAU was a big story with Lane Kiffin. Miami kind of getting back to national relevance. in this year, and being able to, really was a national title contender until the final couple weeks of the season with them. This is an interesting game because, I mean, does it come down to, bowl experience? And, Temple was in a bowl game last year. FIU was not. And I don't think that it really matters here. I think, seeing, because I mean I haven't bet a lot of these games, so I've been waiting a little bit. So I don't know how much real big statistical analysis I have here, but I would tend to lean with FIU here. More often than not, it's not a mutually exclusive thing, but more often than not, I'm going to lean to the dogs more earlier in the bowl games than I am, I guess, late. But I initially thought it was going to be reported that it was kind of going to be the Owl Bowl when this was first released, that there was going to be Temple and FAU, which I think would have maybe been a better game. But I lean with FIU here. I think maybe they're kind of the team in Miami and in South Florida that's kind of been a little bit ignored, and that they might want to come out and make a statement. And betting dogs early is usually better bets, I think, more often than not. So I'm going to go with this team. I don't think the bowl experience matters as much. FIU actually played in this bowl game back in 2011 and lost, so they haven't been to a bowl game in a while. But I don't think this is kind of a happy to be there situation. So I'm going to lean with taking FIU in the points here.
Well, I'll be interested to see if we get a line move in this game because FIU's top receiver, Thomas Owens, not going to play, and he's a guy that Pro Football Focus has tweeted about on its college football account a few times here as one of the guys that, had a lot of success this season. So, FIU missing a key playmaker component in this game. We haven't seen any adjustment in the line, and of course, skill position guys generally don't create that big of an adjustment. But again, we'll have to be monitoring the line here with this one. So, since you haven't dove too much into these games, Wes, maybe we'll talk about some of the more technical aspects of handicapping these matchups. And we'll go to Saturday's Birmingham Bowl between Texas Tech and South Florida. And you've got South Florida here as a 2.5-point favorite. You've got a total in the upper 60s. It's hovering around 66.5, 67. Now, two things stand out about this game. One is that Texas Tech's defense is a hell of a lot better with defensive coordinator David Gibbs, who actually just got himself a contract extension. The other is that we're looking at a lot of tempo in this game. South Florida, with that Sterling Gilbert offense, likes to get up and go. We know what Texas Tech wants to do on offense. So how do you approach that from a betting standpoint, Wes, where you have two teams that you would expect to run a lot of plays, but they also haven't played in the better part of 3 or 4 weeks except for practice? Do you expect that to be kind of sloppy early on, or do you think that with the extra practice time, teams will get things squared away?
I tend to lean maybe a little bit into a sluggish start with these teams. I mean, the situation is going to vary, but I tend to believe that teams kind of, maybe struggle a little bit early. So maybe you look at a first quarter under or something like that. I don't believe those are up yet. Those type of things don't usually get up until the day before or the day of the game. So, unless it's maybe a high-profile game, because you might have like a couple of the CFP playoffs where you might have some first halves and some derivative first quarter stuff up already. But speaking particularly of this game, I would actually lean to the side here and lean to Texas Tech, and it's probably what I'm going to end up taking because I look at them and they had to rally to get into the bowl game, and they went into Austin and beat Texas to get bowl eligible, while South Florida, I think, kind of was the team that a lot of people talked up as, that team that's going to get in the New Year's Six from the non-Power 5. And, the fact that they might be disappointed to be here. They were in this bowl game last year, actually. When you go to a bowl game 2 years in a row, unless it's like the Rose Bowl or something like that, you're kind of disappointed, I think, to be maybe in the same bowl game, whereas Texas Tech said, they really had to rally to get back in this. Obviously, Charlie Strong is going to know a little bit about this Texas Tech offense, having faced it several times as the Texas head coach. But, this is another one of the angles I kind of look at in bowl games is scheduling. And not necessarily just conference, the fact that the Big 12 is better than the AAC. It's not really that, but the non-conference. And Texas Tech played a pretty tough schedule, playing Arizona State and playing Houston, who are teams that also made bowl games here. So I would lean toward the Texas Tech side. As I said, South Florida played South Carolina in this game last year, won, but did not cover. So I think that what you were asking about earlier, you may see a little bit of an early underpace here, I think, because of maybe the familiarity between what the two coaches run, since they have gone against each other at previous stops, and also with the layoff. But the side here.
It's a really good point about South Florida playing in the Birmingham Bowl last year. They were a double-digit favorite for most of the bowl season over South Carolina, and that game went to overtime, and they very well could have lost. And some people would say that South Florida team last year was better. The offense certainly was. This year, the defense has been much, much better for the Bulls under Charlie Strong. So maybe this game does become a little bit more of a defensive struggle with what David Gibbs has done, with what Charlie Strong has done to fix this South Florida defense. And that's really what South Florida wanted. I mean, grabbing a big name like Charlie Strong coming off that Texas job was really good for them after losing Willie Taggart. But getting a defensive-minded guy was good for them, too, because that's what they needed. I like the point you brought up about the schedule as well. I mean, South Florida, when you looked at their schedule coming to this season, it was very weak. I mean, they avoided Memphis. They avoided, playing Central Florida until that last game of the season. And, nobody expected Central Florida to be as good of a team as they were. Played Houston, wound up losing to them in that game. Didn't have to play Navy. They avoided SMU. They avoided a lot of the better teams here in the AAC, and they still couldn't run the table. Now, they were the better team against Central Florida in that finale, but still, that was almost a month ago by the time this game gets played. So I think you're definitely on the right track with looking at some scheduling angles there. How about game 223, 224, the Armed Forces Bowl between Army and San Diego State? There's a lot going on with this game. Army coming off of that win over Navy. They win the Commander-in-Chief trophy for the first time since, 1996, I think it is. So huge game for them. And it's tough to get back on track, military school or not. Having the discipline to get back on track, not easy to do. Oh, and then you also face a team that sees the triple option almost perennially because San Diego State plays against Air Force. So what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, and one thing I did want to add before I go to this game, I'm not a huge trend guy, but it pertains to that Texas Tech-South Florida game because South Florida is ranked and Texas Tech is obviously not. Ranked teams against unranked teams usually haven't been great bets. I think it's like where the unranked team has covered 56% of the time since I think it dates back to 2005. And you already now it didn't win the first situation because Oregon was the unranked team and of course lost to Boise, but Texas Tech does kind of qualify in that angle. But getting to the Armed Forces game, Army played not in this game last year. They played in the Heart of Dallas Bowl against North Texas and did not cover a big line. They were 11-point favorites and won by 7. You always wonder how Army is going to approach this bowl game. This is the best season they've had in a long time. They now have started a new streak over Navy. They've won 2 years in a row where it's almost like that Army-Navy game is kind of a bowl game. because it's the last regular season game of the regular season. You know, it's always the end of the year. It's always the one that you get up for. And, you know, the fact that Army had lost so much to Navy and Navy had that long winning streak, you know, now Army has kind of seemingly got back on par with Navy, who's been probably the most consistent of the three academies over the last decade or so. But, you know, I do wonder a little bit about this game because this is such a low total. And usually when you have a low total, I think it's 46 now. It might have opened 49 at some places. Usually you would want to maybe lean more toward the dog with a low total game. So I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with this. I mean, San Diego State has a really good defense. It's a top 15 defense in the country. So, you know, they play an option team in Air Force, so they're going to be familiar with it. So I don't think that they're going to come out unprepared. You wonder how much Army is going to be successful defending Rashad Penny because, I mean, you know, Penny was a kid that I think, you know, you knew he probably wasn't going to win the Heisman even if he was invited because of, you know, San Diego State's just not as high profile of a program, but he's probably a kid that really deserved to be there and, you know, got snubbed and didn't even get invited to New York, even though he did get votes from a lot of West Coast voters. So this might be a game where, you know, they want to really showcase him, and he's going to want to show out. I mean, I think that the more public and recreational bettors are going to be on San Diego State, but my lean would be probably, and I haven't played this, and I don't know if I will or not, but my lean would probably be to Army since it's because it's such a low total, and if points are at a premium, you would like to take the points more rather than lay the points. So Army, if I could get 7, and it's 6.5 pretty much across the board. If you want to buy up, you know, $7, $1.20, or you know, might be $1.25 at some places. That would be kind of the direction I would look here.
One more bowl game to hit on, and then we'll transition over to the NFL. That's the Hawaii Bowl between Houston and Fresno State, game 227, 228 on the board. This one on Christmas Eve there, December 24th. And you know, the Hawaii Bowl is always such an interesting handicap because, generally speaking, you get a Mountain West team that's accustomed to going out there to Hawaii and having to play against a team that doesn't go to Hawaii very often. And when we saw that San Diego State Cincinnati game a couple of years ago, that was the easiest handicap I think we've ever had here. Consensus opinion on this show, all of us loved that San Diego State side. They wound up winning, I think it was 42-3 as like a 4.5 point favorite, something like that. So here's a pretty interesting one. You've got Houston, you've got Fresno State. Fresno State's been to Hawaii already this season. They're the 2.5 point dog here with some indications that this number may be moving up to 3. I can't get over the fact that, to me, this line move looks wrong, just based on the situation.
Yeah, it does look a little funny to me. I mean, because you can make certainly good cases for Fresno State. I mean, you know, Jeff Tedford did a great job hitting this team. This team was 1-11, and he turned it into 9-4 and got to the Mountain West Championship game. They're 9th in the country in scoring defense, only giving up about 17 a game. Houston was kind of a little bit, I think, considered to be a disappointment. I mean, you know, and this is a team that used 3 quarterbacks this year. They finally settled on De'Aaron King, who's kind of, I think, more in the vein of what they had previously with a kind of a dual running and passing threat, kind of what they had with Greg Ward in previous seasons. But yeah, I'm wondering about this game. I mean, because you know, you have to look at the mindset. Is Houston going to look at this as a vacation, or are they going to look at it as, hey, we need to you know, atone for that we had a little bit of a disappointing season, that we weren't a factor in the AAC, which a lot of people thought we would be, and you know, the fact that we ended up not being a contender in this game. Yeah, I'm a little baffled by this move as well. I mean, when a team has a big turnaround, there's a tendency to kind of say, well, they're going to kind of regress back to the mean here with Fresno State. But yeah, I wonder a little bit why this line is moving up. I know Houston has the better pedigree and has been more of a quality program in recent years, but I mean, I think this Fresno State team, may take this a little bit more seriously. They got an opportunity to get to 10 wins. The fact that they've already played out at Hawaii, so I mean, the familiarity is going to be there. Now, obviously, it's a bowl game and not a regular season game, so you have more events and more media stuff and the luau and all that stuff. But I would tend to agree with you, Adam, here on Fresno State.
All right, let's move over to the NFL side. We got a fully loaded card for Christmas Eve, and then a couple of games coming up on Christmas, which we'll talk about on tomorrow's show. But, Wes, let's hit on three of these games here on Sunday. Let's start with game 105-106 on the board. Detroit takes on Cincinnati. Cincinnati opened a 3.5-point home dog in this one. This number is up to 5 pretty much across the marketplace. Some places with a little bit of extra juice on the +5. But it's really hard to back Cincinnati after what we saw last week with the Marvin Lewis announcement and also with all the injuries that they have. But this line did reach a stopping point. Typically when you see a number go from 3.5 through 4 to 4.5 up to 5, it probably is more likely to get to 6 than it is to come back down. But we've reached a point of resistance, and that kind of intrigues me.
Yeah, it does me too. And, it is hard to back Cincinnati in light of what we saw in Minnesota last week. And plus, I don't know if it has officially been announced or if it's even a possibility of the fact that Cincinnati's out of the playoffs. And they did eventually put A.J. McCarron in the game last week, So is this something where you say, you know what, let A.J. McCarron start, see what we have with him. If he showcases himself, I mean, they almost had a trade done to Cleveland for him earlier in the year. So, that tells you maybe there's some interest in giving this guy a shot to be a starting quarterback. And I think in light of, what people have seen now with Jimmy Garoppolo having kind of put some life into what looked like a dead 49ers team and that they may have found their quarterback of the future, maybe Cincinnati decides to give A.J. McCarron a look to see if they can either trade him or maybe if they think that he's an upgrade over Andy Dalton and that makes him expendable. I mean, that hasn't been announced yet. But, I do wonder if this is perhaps, this is the last home game for Marvin Lewis, if maybe Cincinnati kind of circles the wagons here. Detroit still is alive for the playoffs. I mean, I didn't think that they really played very well last Saturday against Chicago, but they played well enough because Chicago, I think, was so bad. And Chicago even had a chance late in the game to kind of get in the back door within the number. Detroit is still alive for the playoffs, but those 8-6 teams, Detroit and Seattle, and there's one other one that's kind of slipping my mind here. So if you can think of it, please tell me. But there are 3 teams at 8-6, Detroit and Seattle being 2 of them, and they kind of got put behind the 8 ball with Atlanta hanging on Monday night and stayed at 9-5. So Detroit is still alive for the playoffs, but they still, I think, would need some help. Matthew Stafford has been, battling injuries. I mean, and played obviously last week, but didn't set the world on fire. So, I mean, the fact that you are seeing a little bit of resistance here at 5, which is really not a key number in the NFL. I mean, I think people listening know the key numbers are 3 and 7 and maybe even 6 to a degree. 4 and 5, especially 5, kind of usually falls in that dead number category. And the fact that you're seeing a little resistance maybe tells me that Cincinnati could have one decent effort left in them. And that even though they're banged up and even though it's a disappointing season and they're not going anywhere, that, maybe they step up for Marvin Lewis. I think generally they like Marvin Lewis, that the players, kind of like them, and they, are usually a team that plays pretty hard. But, I really just don't want – it's kind of more of a I don't want to lay the points with the Lions here on the road. I don't know if I trust in this situation. I think the line's a little inflated simply because they still do have some playoff chances. But I don't have a lot of confidence in it. And if I were to play it, I would play the Bengals.
Seattle and Dallas both have 8-6 records, and those two teams play each other in that 4:25 time slot. So those are the other ones, along with Detroit. And I think that you talk about a lot of good points there, and also something that we probably haven't talked about enough here this week on the show, but we can go ahead and mention it here now, that inflation due to the quote-unquote must-win angle for teams. If Detroit loses this game, they're done for the playoffs. And, I mean, they may not make it anyway, but if they lose this game, there's virtually no chance for them. So with that in mind, you do get that inflation in the point spread, and it also helps. You've got a Cincinnati team that's looked so awful the last 2 weeks here. So I do kind of wonder, if maybe you wait around on this game and you can pick off Cincinnati +6 or something like that and take your shot with something that looks to have pretty good line value.
Yeah, I think you could definitely wait around. And, I mean, even if it goes the other way, we were kind of talking about it's in the middle of this dead number kind of limbo at 4.5, 5, 5.5. So, if you get 6, great. But, if you don't get like 5.5 but only get 4.5 or 5, I don't think you lose much value, even though you're not necessarily getting the best of it. I mean, it's not exactly – it hasn't exactly crossed any key numbers. So, I don't know if the number really is going to come into play so much, but, I don't think it hurts to wait here because I don't think it's going to, all of a sudden crash and go back down to 3 because I don't think a lot of people are going to love Cincinnati here. So, you probably would be well served waiting, and you're seeing, I think, in a couple of these other games, teams with the playoff aspirations and that are still kind of in it. I mean, you look at Kansas City, that's crossed through 10 now, where they've kind of taken control of the AFC West, having the tiebreaker over the Chargers. So, I mean, that's a little bit of a big number here, and I think but you could also see some of these other games where you're seeing where the teams are kind of in the must-win, like the Chargers, open 7, 7.5, and now you're seeing some 6.5s out there for a Jets team that's out of it. So, I mean, there are opportunities here to play against some of these teams because not every team that's in the must-win situation wins. So I think that there are some opportunities there, and this Detroit-Cincinnati game could be one of them.
Yeah, we talked about a couple of those games with Brian Blessing yesterday, that Chargers-Jets game and also the Rams and Titans where you got two road favorites. You've got a Tennessee team that's still technically in the playoff hunt. You have a Jets team that's not, but the Jets played really well last week against the Saints. So, those two games do have some similarities to them. Let's go to a game where there's absolutely nothing on the line. Game 117, 118. Denver takes on Washington. Washington a 3.5-point favorite here, but Denver's been the preferred side early in the week. Any interest in this game? Do you feel like there's an edge to be had?
It's tough to find one. I mean, my only interest in the game is the fact that I have the Redskins under 7.5 season wins. So I'd like to see it drop one of the last two. They had a chance. Arizona got every chance to win the game in Washington last week and kind of cinched that, but Blaine Gabbert wasn't able to make that happen, hence why Arizona's probably going back to Drew Stanton this week. But Denver did show a little bit of life in Indianapolis, and I mean, they're obviously going to be looking for a quarterback in the offseason, but I mean, I don't know if it's saying much, but I think clearly the best quarterback for the Broncos this season has been Osweiler. When he came in the game, I mean, I think you've seen enough of Trevor Siemian. I mean, Paxton Lynch, maybe you're willing to give more time since you did trade up for him and have put some time and investment into him, maybe you're going to give him another shot. But Osweiler, I think, has been the best of the three quarterbacks. I think he's been the most consistent. I mean, he hasn't been great, but he came in that game against the Colts and, I mean, looked composed, didn't make any mistakes, was able to move the offense fairly well because, I mean, the Colts jumped up to a 10-0 lead, and then it was like nothing after that. And then Denver pretty much dominated the game on both sides of the ball. And I think, one of the things about Denver being the one of the top-ranked defenses in the league, and yet they were, I think, going into last week, this is pre-Colts game stat here, they were 24th in scoring defense. And, I mean, I think the reason why is because you played a lot with Trevor Siemian, and he's turned the ball over. And same with Paxton Lynch, and put your guys on short fields, and I don't care how good your defense, Denver's is still one of the better ones in the league. You put them on short fields, they're going to give up points in the NFL. That's just the way it is. Washington is such a curious team to look at here because they're now officially eliminated from the playoffs. You have Kirk Cousins, who is going to be a free agent. I believe probably the most high-profile quarterback free agent in the offseason. Are they going to tag him? Are they willing to part ways with him? I don't know if they really have a ready-to-go heir apparent to Cousins on the Redskins roster. But, that I think is the million-dollar question with the organization is if they're going to commit to him long term, or if they're going to let him test the free agent market and then maybe see if they can pick up a quarterback somewhere in where they're likely to be in the top 12 or whatever for the first round. So, I'm really not in love with Washington here. If I were to make a play, it would likely be the Denver Broncos because I think that they are at least showing a little bit of life here late in the season, and I think the fact that they knew that they were eliminated, Washington was realistically still alive going into last weekend, and, at least mathematically, and now that they know that, they're just kind of playing out the string here, I think Denver's known that for a couple weeks, so the Denver Broncos, I think, would be my play. I think they're just playing better football here down the stretch.
What about some of these teams that have been injured all year long? I mean, Cincinnati is one that's dealt with quite a few injuries, and we've kind of seen that here late in the season, though, where they've had a lot of guys that have been concussed and have found themselves on the injury report. Washington's just dealt with this week after week after week. I think last week when I looked, they had 30 players on their injury list on Pro Football Reference's website. It's been like that week in and week out, it feels like, for this team. Do you just sort of feel like those teams that have had the injury bugs around all year long just kind of, they're just ready to be done at this point?
Yeah, I think in most cases there are. I mean, you're always going to have some guys that get opportunities late in the season that end up making themselves some money that, hey, they're finally getting their chance. Maybe it's a third-string defensive back or a third-string lineman that's been either on the P squad or guys that have played special teams primarily. So you'll always have those players that end up earning themselves some jobs for the next season that were kind of maybe the bottom of the roster, 51st, 52nd, 53rd guy in the roster, and then they end up sticking late in the season. But there are a few teams like the Redskins that have had those injuries. I think the Colts are one of those teams, and that's a little bit more of an extreme case because you have a coaching staff that knows that they're going to be out of work here in 2 weeks. You have a lot of injuries. They're 3-11, really just kind of playing out the season here. But the Redskins certainly are banged up, and every team is banged up in the league in Week 16. It's just some cases are more extreme than others. You look at Denver; they just put Shane Ray, one of their pass rushers, on IR. They have 3 quarterbacks. Just their quarterbacks on the injury list with Chad Kelly, Paxton Lynch, and Trevor Siemian now on IR, so they pretty much have to go with Brock Osweiler, even though I think he's been their best quarterback. I mean, you know, some teams, I think it's just looking at the situations, whereas I know Cincinnati's kind of banged up, but I think maybe they have a circle the wagons effort. I mean, there's no reason for the Redskins to really circle the wagons here other than pride. And I think with that Cousins thing hanging over them, and there's just a lot of uncertainty with the organization. I don't know how hot Jay Gruden's seat is. I'm sure it's not cold. I mean, there's a possibility they could make a change. I don't think that they ultimately will, but there's a lot of uncertainty with both of these organizations, but I think there's probably even a little bit more uncertainty with Washington, so that's why I would kind of stick with Denver here.
One other game I want to hit on here, game 123-124, Jacksonville takes on San Francisco. The Jimmy Garoppolo hype train firing up again here this week. This number opened 5.5, down to 4 at a lot of shops out there. Not a big surprise to see this line move with Jacksonville going cross-country and some of the expectations placed on them here. But, you know, what do you think happens with this number as we go forward? I mean, do we still see that wave of Jimmy G money, or do you think that this one's kind of going to sit here where it is?
I think it's going to be relatively stable here. I mean, maybe you could see this going to 3.5. I don't see it going to 3, but you know, Jacksonville is in the playoffs. I mean, all of their early drafts, and I think that their early draft picks and all of their, you know, they've had some pretty good free agent signings, especially on that defense that have worked out with Malik Jackson, Calais Campbell, A.J. Boye. So they've really done well in the free agent market to build along with the young talent with Miles Jack, Jalen Ramsey, Dante Fowler, etc. But, you know, you wonder now that Jacksonville, they're actually getting a little bit of talk now in the national media. All of a sudden the national media has kind of figured out, whoa, this team's 10-4 and in the playoffs. And, you know, New England and Pittsburgh meeting last weekend, I think, kind of brought that home that they are, you know, still the teams to beat in the AFC. But Jacksonville, realistically, I mean, nothing has been clinched from those two teams. So Jacksonville, realistically, you know, has something to play for and could at least get, I think, a first-round bye. In terms of the scenarios, you know, I'm not sure if they can win the AFC outright, but, you know, they can at least get that bye and not have to play that first weekend, which would be, you know, a different situation for them, obviously. But, you know, going across country and with San Francisco, this team, I think, has a little bit of hope now and has a little bit of life with Garoppolo at quarterback. And, you know, you watch this team. I mean, they're not great, but I've seen this team, you know, all year, and it's like, man, this team is really bad. But then it just takes a quarterback to give them life, and then you're like, well, maybe they're not so bad after all. So, I mean, my lean here would be on this kind of reverse line movement with San Francisco. I just I think that they do have a little bit of life. I'm wondering how Jacksonville is going to handle success. I think they got an opponent last week that's kind of seemingly mailed it in for the season with Houston. I mean, we were talking about injuries in the previous segment. I don't know if anybody's really had more than the Houston Texans this year, losing their stars on really both sides of the football with Watson and Watt. So, I mean, I wonder how Jacksonville now is, you know, they're not that under the radar team anymore. Now they're 10-4. They're locked into the playoffs. You know, how they're going to handle success and how they're going to handle expectations, because I think people thought that they were going to be better, but I don't think people thought that they would have a 2-game lead in the AFC South, you know, going into Week 16. Tennessee, I think, was the slight favorite going into the year to win the division. And, you know, you just wonder how they're going to handle success and having to go on the road to play a team that they should beat. I mean, you go on the road, you should beat a 4-10 team that's kind of playing it out and has nothing to play for. But I think San Francisco, you know, has shown some pride and has continued to play hard. So, I mean, this is no gimme for the Jaguars, and I would lean toward taking the 49ers and the points here.
Well, Wes, really appreciate your time. Good insights here across college football and the NFL. Happy holidays to you and yours, bud, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Okay, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to you and everyone listening.